Well, welcome to this edition of 5 Minutes with Bo Hansen. I want to talk about two key concepts. One is what we call experiential learning, and two is this concept which I call compounding practice. The first one is experiential learning. Now, if you're a client of ours, there's a very good chance that you've done some activities in the sessions together. One of the reasons why we do these activities, and it could be something as simple as building a house of cards, it could be a communication list activity, it could be a game called Disc Bingo, you may have to create a ring of paper, you may have to do an exercise called nail balance. We've got hundreds of them. But the reason why we do the activity is because it challenges our behaviours. And your student athletes can see the actions and their behaviours actually taking place, and they can see what their team members are doing. And an experiential activity is something that you take as seriously as practice, and so you tend to get the similar sorts of behaviours that you would see in a practice. And so what that means is that you get behaviours in these activities that you get happening on the field or in a game. And so there's a good quote that says, how you do something is how you do everything. Now, I'm not sure if that's 100% true, but I've certainly noticed that it is a little bit true. And it's certainly true in regard to these experiential activities. Last week I was working with a client, and without giving too much away, it's one of those lists where the key instructions are all the way down the very bottom of the list. And there's something like 30 items that you have to work through. But the last instruction that I give is read the list, then begin. Now, most student athletes and also coaches, a lot of people don't hear the read the list, then begin. Most people just start, especially the D's and the I's, they just begin. And what happens is they tend to take forever to actually complete the activity. Now, quite often the S's and C's, because they listen better and they follow instructions, they read the list and they see right down the very bottom, it says just do questions 25, 26 and 27, then say, hey, we're the greatest team ever. That is the actual instruction. And so suddenly, whilst all of the others are working away on the activity, you get a team that's completed it, they all stand up and say, we're the greatest team ever, and everyone's looking around like, what's going on here? Anyway, that happened this week. One of the teams simply stood up really quickly after I handed them the activity, and they said, we're the greatest team ever. And I said, well, fantastic, you guys have just won the competition. And everyone else is looking at them going, well, how did that happen? I'm still working through the list. And then I asked the athletes, I said, well, how did your group win? And I always set it up in non-diverse groups. So that means all the D's, the I's, S's, and C's together. And what happened was it was actually the I's that won, and that's really unusual. Normally they don't win. And so I've done the activity enough now to know that, or enough now to know that it's usually the S's and C's, as I mentioned before. Anyway, the I's won today, and I said, well, how did you do that? And one of the athletes spoke about the fact that I had done this before. Now, that's fine, because the reality is I introduced this concept of what we call compounding practice. Now, that athlete used her relevant experience doing this particular activity to help her group exceed and beat the other teams in this particular challenge. Now, that doesn't always happen. Sometimes you find that when you do an activity, someone may have done it before, and they even suggest the solution, but nobody listens. And so then we have a large conversation about the impact of that athlete's behavior and their inability to either provide leadership or certainly to influence the other people on their team. Now, in this case, the athlete did influence them, so we had a conversation about their abilities to do that and how that's a critical quality of effective leadership. But the other thing that came up as a result of this was how when we talked about using your experience, it's very much the same as the second concept, compounding practices. And the challenge for all of us, as not just athletes, but people who go to work every day, is to remember what we did the day before and to look at how we can improve the next day. But if every day we turn up at work or we turn up at practice and we are literally reinventing the wheel, then we tend not to improve, or at least not very quickly. And so we related it to the concept of when you put your money in the bank. Why do you put your money in the bank? Some people, if they put it underneath their pillow or under their mattress or buried in the ground, whatever amount you put in there is going to be the same amount the next day. But when you put it into the bank, you earn interest, and that interest compounds. So then you earn interest on the extra amount that was generated that day or that month, and you're earning compound interest on top of that. That's exactly what should happen when we play sport and when athletes turn up to practice every day. So talk to your players about this concept of compounding their practices. Now, to do that, it takes several key, if you like, activities or projects for them to complete. Number one, I'm always talking about keeping a training journal. It's such an easy thing to do. When I rowed, I kept it in a post-it note format. So we literally had post-it notes next to our boat, and we'd break off a post-it note and we'd write, what were the 3 things that we did well today? What's the 1 thing we need to do better next time we practice? Then we'd post that post-it note on the boat, and after we'd come to practice the next day, we'd look at what it was, refresh our memory, then we put it into a folder and we'd keep it there. And you start to see patterns emerge of the things that work well for you and the things that add value and add speed to your team. And so that's number 1, you have to keep a journal. Number 2, because of that journal and what you're entering into it, you have to turn up at practice with an idea is that this is the key area that I want to get better at. I'm looking to improve in these key parts of my respective technique or as a team. Now, it can't be the coach that's continually telling the players and the student athletes how to make these improvements. I've worked with enough teams now to know that that's not a quality of teams that win championships. Teams that win championships, they take responsibility for these things that they want to improve, and they literally compound their practices. So the next day they're not talking about improving the same basic things, or at least working on those same basic areas in those things, those elements that they want to get better at on a daily basis. They're literally progressing to the next stage, to the next step. And so think about it like depositing money into a bank. Think about the interest that you can earn. And interest is all about behaviors that generate that extra income, behaviors that generate interest, keeping a journal, writing down your goals, discussing with your team members, evaluating every practice, getting feedback from your coach and team members, and changing the concept of that conversation. So it's not just one way when a coach is just telling you how to set goals and what you need to do this practice. So there's a small challenge for you. Number 1, if you've got some challenges with your team, get them to do a little activity and see what happens. I almost guarantee that every behavior that you're seeing happening on the field will certainly happen in the activity themselves. Make sure you set it up right though. You've got to tell them to take it seriously as they would any other practice. And then number 2, introduce this concept of compounding their practices so that they can make deposits and earn interest on the efforts and the extra work that they put in. As always, if you have any questions, please feel free. Just reach out. We're here to help as much as possible. We hope this has been useful for you.